U.S. intelligence officials are confirming that Moscow did meddle in the presidential election, but President-elect Trump is not buying it. The dispute over Russia's role fueling a public spat between Mr. Trump and White House officials last week. Joining us right now is Senator John Thune, chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. Senator, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Maria. Good morning.
So where do you sit on this? We keep hearing that they meddled, but I'm not understanding how Russia meddled. Do you believe that Russia takes any responsibility for Donald Trump winning this election?
Well, I think they try to be disruptive. I don't think there's any question that Russia always wants to destabilize the American political system, and I don't think that should come as any surprise to anyone. You know, the specific steps and actions that were taken in this election are being looked at. And I hope when we have a full review by the Intelligence Committee that we'll get to the bottom of it. But, you know, at this point, trying to figure out what sort of retaliatory steps one might take are, I think, very premature, because we need to find out exactly what happened and then react to it accordingly. But, you know, clearly there was an attempt this time around to mess with. But, you know, what the ultimate goal of that, whether it was designed to help Donald Trump win, as a lot are alleging, you know, remains to be seen. And I think we have to get to the bottom of it through the intelligence community before we can make that assessment.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Julian Assange was right here on Fox News the other night with Sean Hannity, and he said the leaks of the DNC emails actually came from a DNC insider. Now, I don't know if we're supposed to believe Julian Assange, but he said this did not come from Russia.
Right, and it's why I think, Maria, trying to, you know, people who are making these snap judgments right now based on a lot of the reporting that's out there, I think until we are able to hear from the Intelligence Committee, hopefully in a coordinated way, if you get the DNI and the FBI and the CIA all up in front of the Intelligence Committees in the Congress with a report and assessment of what actually happened, I think we'll be able to make a better determination about what steps need to be taken moving forward. But, you know, right now there's just a lot of wild accusations flying back and forth. Clearly there was an attempt to mess with this election, but what form that took and what its impact was, I think, remains to be seen. And so until we know the answers to those questions, I think it's a little bit, again, premature to start, you know, coming to conclusions about what the U.S. should do next.
I'm just trying to understand why all of a sudden Russia is this, you know, major big enemy on the left. I mean, you know, President Obama, his entire 8 years was basically trying to buddy up to the Russians. I don't know if you remember this moment back in 2012 when President Obama was about to get reelected and he whispered to then Prime Minister Medvedev. Listen to this, Senator.
After my election, I have more flexibility. Yep. Yeah, and I transmit this information to Vladimir.
So there's President Obama schmoozing then Prime Minister Medvedev, basically saying, I'll have more flexibility after I win this election. And now, so how come President Obama and the Dems did not tell us how evil the Russians were these entire 8 years?
Irony of ironies, you know. The rhetoric has certainly changed coming out of the White House compared to what it was just a few years ago. And that's why I think it's important. I mean, obviously things have changed. What's happened in Syria and the Russian involvement there, their relationship with Iran, I think bears a lot on our relationship. And I think we need to look at the Russians as adversaries. And clearly, you know, history would suggest that we should be very skeptical in terms of our relationship in dealing with them. But this president has had a very checkered record when it comes to dealing with Russia and their allies in the Middle East and that region of the world. So to now come out and make some of the statements that they're making, I think it comes across as a little bit ironic and perhaps hypocritical. But I think the broader point that you're making is the relationship with Russia going forward is something now that the Trump administration is going to inherit. And the Obama administration on their way out the door is making assertions about things that they might do to retaliate against Russia for meddling in the election.
Right.
But I think this is largely now going to fall on the Trump administration in terms of how they respond to this. And that's why it's important that we confirm these, you know, the national security team that he's trying to put in place. And
right.
Rex Tillerson, who was recently nominated for Secretary of State, and the others, I think, need to get into those positions as quickly as possible so that they can begin to respond to some of these situations situations, not only in Russia, but China, other places around the world where we have a lot of hotspots.
So, Senator, how does this impact the domestic agenda? From your standpoint, what do you think is realistic in terms of new regulations moving forward, let's call it the first 1 to 200 days?
Well, I think that he has a really unique opportunity, Maria, because the previous administration did so many things by executive action that this president can come in and reverse and undo a lot of the damage that's been done. You know, he could, for example, approve the Keystone Pipeline very quickly, which would be immediately create a lot of jobs in the economy. He could roll back the Department of Labor overtime rules, which would be a devastating shot to the economy if they were implemented. So he could undo that damage. He could undo a lot of the Obama administration's attack on affordable energy that has been waged largely through the EPA. These are all things that have had a profound negative impact on the economy. Repealing and replacing Obamacare obviously is something that Congress will have to be involved with, but we intend to be involved with that. We think that Obamacare has been extremely harmful to people across this country, skyrocketing premiums, insurance markets collapsing, and dwindling choices for consumers in this country. And so that's something that needs to be dealt with on day one. The issue of tax reform was mentioned earlier by Jason Miller is a huge issue when it comes to getting the growth rate back in our economy. I think if this president focuses on getting that growth rate back up to 3 to 4%, creating better paying jobs, getting wages back up, and policies that would create conditions that are favorable to that along the lines of those I just mentioned, I think he'll have a lot of support among the American people, and it will enable him to do many of the harder things that he'll have to do down the road.
Right, and it does feel like he's got real support on that in terms of moving the needle on economic growth through tax reform. So that should...
I think he does. Yeah, I mean, and tax reform, frankly, it is long overdue. It's going to be very hard. We all know that. But I think he's got a position. He had a very decisive election victory. I think the American people indicated very clearly they want a different direction. If you came out of the exit polls, said 62% of the people think the country's headed in the wrong direction.
Yes.
52% think the economy should be the #1 issue.
Yep.
So when it comes to the economy and jobs and wages, there is a huge opening there, I think, for this president to chart a new direction.
Exactly.